Okay, so now we are in voiceover mode. I hope you enjoyed the little ASMR bit for the beginning of the unboxing. So some of you might be confused as to why we are painting now and not using the colored pencils. The thing is, I know that maybe some of you will be annoyed by this, but personally, I don't tend to use colored pencils on their own. I almost always use them in conjunction with another medium, whether it be watercolor, gouache, markers. And so even though I wanted to give you guys like a first impression / review of these colored pencils, I also recognized that for me, I wanted to use them in a way that would make sense for the way that I actually will use them in practice. So apologies for those of you who were hoping for an exclusive color pencil drawing. That's just not the way that I use them. So it just makes more sense for me to really get a sense of how they perform by using them in the way that I would use color pencils in typical manner. So I will say that I did use a combination of supplies that were a little bit different for me. So here I'm using acrylic gouache on hot press paper, and then we'll be using the colored pencils. And I actually will be kind of going back and forth between the colored pencils and the gouache, which typically when I use colored pencils with paints, one, I often use cold press paper. I only just recently started exploring hot press paper because I always just assumed that it wasn't the type of paper that I personally preferred for paint, but I'm kind of coming around to it. It's very smooth, which is good for avoiding too much texture with colored pencils, but it's so slippery when using the paints, especially gouache. I find that it just feels so slick and it's very bizarre, but it does create a really interesting look. And yeah, I ended up kind of enjoying the final results because it's a mix of super smooth areas and then leaving little bits of the color pencil kind of peeking through is really, really interesting. So to really dig into these color pencils and why I splurged on them. So up until this point, I mainly use Prismacolor Premiere color pencils and the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils. I really, really like the Polychromos ones because they're oil-based, and so they're really great for these kind of under sketches with paints because they are water resistant and they are a little bit of a harder lead, so you can sharpen them to a really good point for details and line art and things like that. Whereas the Prismacolor are super, super soft, so they have really amazing color payoff, and they look so vibrant. And the thing about them though is because they're so soft, they break really easily. So that's why I use both of them interchangeably. And so I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice if I could find a colored pencil that would serve both of those purposes in one pencil? And I did a little bit of kind of poking around, and people seem to really like these Caran d'Ache colored pencils. And so I figured, you know what? It's been a while since I've tried like a brand new art supply, and I really like using colored pencils. So I figured, why not? Let's give it a shot. And so I splurged and got the 72 set. And I think I will do like a video in the future comparing all of the colored pencils with each other. For the sake of this video, I wanted to only use the Caran d'Ache color pencils just to like really get a feel for them. But my first impression of them is they do hold up when sharpening, which I really appreciated. I find that like they didn't break the entire time that I used them for this illustration. But it could be a number of things. It could be potentially me using it on acrylic gouache. It could be me using them on the hot press paper. But just from first impression, I don't think they're quite as soft as the Prismacolor. I think in my experience, I feel like the Prismacolor still is superior in terms of color payoff and like pigmentation. But again, it could be in combination with this art supply mashup, because with acrylic wash, it does essentially dry to like a plastic. Like acrylic wash, it's permanent because it's basically plastic. And so that could be creating just in also it being on a hot press watercolor paper, everything is just ultra smooth. And so that doesn't really give the color pencils much to grip onto. So that could be part of why the color payoff just wasn't as satisfying as when I use Prismacolors. So again, it's just something that like I'll have to explore with comparing the color pencils with each other, and also using these Caran d'Ache color pencils in different kind of combinations with other mediums and other paper surfaces. So for now, I'll say that I'm still really happy with them. I really like them and I'm not regretting purchasing them. But I think that Prismacolor, as of right now, from upon first impressions, Prismacolor still might be my favorite. But before we continue, I just want to take a moment to thank my patrons. I have had a Patreon page since 2020, and it is the reason why I'm able to be a full-time artist. I have tiers ranging from $2 all the way through $14, which is directly supporting me as an artist, but you also benefit from receiving exclusive posts about my process as an artist more in depth. I also provide a discount code for my regular shop, and I also have an exclusive Patreon shop where they can shop previous rewards. This is this month's sticker reward, and the painting that we're working on is the print reward for the month of December. I also have tons of exclusive videos from the past couple of years, ranging from more educational to more casual type videos, and you get to access all of the videos from all years. I also have a podcast now where I do hot takes and I answer questions and provide little insight into my life. I have sketchbook pages that I don't show anywhere else, and lots of like work in progress posts, just more in depth behind the scenes. I have wallpapers, I have little mood boards, I share like my Pinterest pages. And yeah, I hope that just gives a better sense of what my Patreon looks like and what you would get out of it, since I talk about it a lot, but I know that maybe some of you don't really know what exactly is over there. And obviously, no pressure to join. I know that it's just not in everyone's budget to provide financial support to me in that way. Any support that you give me, whether it be on Patreon, my shop, interacting with my YouTube videos and my posts on Instagram, whatever it is, I really appreciate it. And now we can end my shameless plug and get back to the video. Something that I explored with this illustration that I don't think I've really done a ton of before is going back and forth between the paints and the color pencils. Typically, when I use color pencils with another medium, I'm using them last. And so it's like a much more kind of linear process in the sense of I'll use the watercolors, I'll use the markers, and then use the color pencils on top, and then that's it. But for this illustration, as you saw, I laid down really thin washes of gouache and then started using some color pencils on top. And now I'm going back with gouache again. And I actually really enjoy this kind of back and forth. It definitely feels very slow, I guess. Like I'm using really thin washes of gouache and just very slowly kind of building up the color and pulling the lights and the darks. It's very meticulous feeling, but it's really satisfying. And I tried to include like a pretty comprehensive process here of the face, like the rendering of the face, because it's just one of those things where I really like get into the zone, and then at the start it's like it's super patchy and chunky and I'm like, I don't know where this is going, and then I sort of like black out, and then suddenly the face has like come together. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but yeah, I think the difference, so typically when I use color pencils with a paint, I'm using watercolor or regular gouache, and I decided to go with acrylic wash just to see how I felt about mixing it up. And the interesting thing I think about using acrylic wash is that I think the colors feel more vibrant and there's less color shifting, because that's something that I experience with regular gouache and watercolor is the shift of color from when it's wet to dry. So it just feels more predictable using acrylic wash. And another thing, just going back to actually talking about the colored pencils, I found that the lead and the little color swatch on the barrel was extremely accurate to the swatch, which I appreciate. I mean, I do think that it's easier to get the color matching more accurate with a dry medium than it is with a wet medium. But yeah, as you probably know, with something like markers, the cap or like the label outside on the packaging of a marker is often very, very different from what the marker actually looks like when you use it. So it's a little bit more unpredictable in that way, whereas color pencils are much more predictable when you're choosing out your colors. And I think that's a big part of why I like using colored pencils is they just feel very predictable. You feel much more in control of them because they are like, it's a dry media, whereas wet media is a little bit hard to control. There's some more unpredictability about it. So I think that's what was really nice about going back and forth between the two mediums. And so I was also able to like smooth out areas where the colored pencils was looking a little bit too textured. Having colored pencil texture just sort of like peeking here and there throughout the illustration in combination with some of the really like smooth blended areas just creates like some more interest and also reads more traditional looking than it being like a super smooth, slick illustration, if that makes sense. Basically, I just want my work to like look traditional and to still retain that sense that it was physically made by somebody's hand, as opposed to it looking super, super polished, which innately is my nature to make things super clean. But yeah, I want to try and strike a balance with certain areas looking very polished and clean with little bits here and there to show that it is made by like somebody's hand with a paintbrush or with a pencil. And that's why for a lot of the line art in this illustration, typically I would do all of the line art with the paint, but I, again, wanted to get some of that texture in there. So I ended up doing pretty much all the line art with colored pencils and then going back with the gouache for certain areas on top just to really focus certain areas to make them pop a little bit more, because there is sort of a limit to how dark you can really go with the colored pencils. Again, I think it's just because of the really, really slick surface. But yeah, I find that having these different levels of shades and textures with the line art, as well as the rest of the kind of surface of the piece, it just, yeah, again, it just gives it a little bit more dimension. Which, speaking of dimension, I will say that even though I got 72 colors, which is a lot, and I do believe that is the largest set that you can get, or it covers most of the colors available in this particular Caran d'Ache Luminance line, I did actually find that it lacked pastels. There's like a few pastels in there, but I was noticing that most of them are kind of like mid to dark tones. And for me, I really, really love using really light pastel color pencils on top of darker mid-tones to carve or to bring light forward. So certain things like, you know, the highlights in her face or the highlights in the hair or the clothing, I felt like there just wasn't as many pastel options. And I also found that there wasn't a lot of pinks in this selection of colors, which, if you can't tell, I love pink, especially pastel pinks. So that was also another interesting thing to note about this set, and something I didn't really think about when I was purchasing the set. I didn't really pay attention to what the color selection looked like. I was just sort of going off of the idea that, there's 72 colors. Of course, they're going to have everything I'll ever need. But I did find myself thinking, oh, in this instance, I would really want a bubblegum pink, or I'd really want a brighter kind of mid pink. And another thing, I absolutely love using fluorescent and neon colored pencils. And that's also not something that's offered in this set. I have a few neons in the Prismacolor. So again, at this moment in time, the Prismacolors I think are still my favorite. So I'm sure many of you are wondering, is it worth it? Was it worth it to spend $300 on this 72 set of colored pencils? I think that for me, because I am an artist full time and I do use colored pencils quite a lot, I don't regret purchasing them. However, I will say for the more average person, definitely pay attention to what you're looking for out of a colored pencil and also the color selection. I think for me, now having worked with them, I didn't think about paying attention to the color selection that was actually offered. So in that case, if you know what kind of color palette you typically are drawn to, or you know that you're looking for something super soft, or you prefer a lead that's a little bit harder, those are things that you definitely want to pay attention to when purchasing colored pencils. So because I'm a full-time artist and I already have a huge selection of colored pencils in my roster, I know I will get a lot of use out of these and I don't regret buying them, but I can definitely understand if I were to put myself in a different position. For example, if I were to just have to restart my color pencil collection for some reason, knowing what I know now about the color palettes that I gravitate towards and what I need out of a color pencil, then the Caran d'Ache Luminance 72 set probably wouldn't be my first choice, to be honest. I would probably go for the Prismacolor because I know that they have the color selection that I'm looking for in terms of providing the pinks and the pastels, as well as the mids and the dark tones. But that isn't to say that these color pencils are not beautiful or that they didn't perform the way that they should have. The thing about expensive art supplies is a lot of it has to do with how archival they are, as well as how they're made and how well they're going to hold up over time. And that's really important as a full-time professional artist, is that I want to make sure that they have longevity in the illustration as well as the material itself. So I do not regret purchasing them, but I want to caution you guys to really look at what you need out of your art supplies before you make a humongous purchase like this. And as the process of this video, of this illustration is winding down, I realized I didn't get a chance to really talk about the actual illustration. So how it started was with the sticker design, which I showed you earlier with the butterfly motif. And with butterflies and kind of winding down for the end of the year and entering the new year, it really made me think of the theme of metamorphosis and rebirth and new beginnings. And I had recently went to see the Beyonce Renaissance tour in the movie theaters. And so that's just kind of the theme I ended up running with. And so butterflies and daisies kind of symbolize rebirth. And I also chose a color palette that also just felt very fresh and gives me the sense of renewal. And I'm also just obsessed with bows and pastels. So that's kind of what I ran with. And yeah, we have reached the end of 2023. This is going to be my final illustration and final video for this year. I'm weirdly feeling very optimistic for 2024. I'm not really sure why, because this year had a lot of ups and downs for me, but I guess maybe with the turn of the new year, it kind of gives you a sense of a clean slate and starting over in a way. So with my previous Patreon reward themes, I would always just pick things at random. But moving into 2024, I'm actually going to be doing a Zodiac series, so look forward to that. And at the very start of the new year, I'm also going to be launching a very exciting new endeavor, which may include some travel with you guys potentially. So look forward to that as well. And with that being said, I hope you all have an amazing New Year's Eve and good start to 2024. I am so grateful to the little community that we've built over here on this corner of the internet, and that I got to bring some inspiration or joy or company to your 2023, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.